Dr. Jonathan Hale stood on the precipice of the desolate moon, his boots sinking slightly into the dry, powdery surface. The wind was little more than a faint whisper, carrying with it the acrid scent of sulfur from the nearby planet. Far above, the stars shimmered like a scattered collection of diamonds, cold and distant. But it wasn't the beauty of the universe that held his attention tonight. It was the wreckage. A ship, broken and half buried in the jagged rocks, lay before him. The alien craft had come in too fast, far too fast, and now it was nothing more than a tangle of scorched metal and twisted alloys. It hadn't even managed to crash into the moon's surface with the grace of an impact. It had skidded, torn through the atmosphere, and sputtered out of control, leaving a trail of fire and destruction behind it. Dr. Hale had been called in to investigate the wreckage. The Colonial Defense Forces had received a distress signal, a faint, fragmented plea from an unknown source. Of course, it hadn't been an official CDF mission, those were rare, usually classified. But when a distress call came in from an unknown alien ship, the higher-ups had made an exception. As he navigated the wreckage, his mind was already racing with questions. What had happened to the ship? Who had been on board? And why had it crashed here, of all places? He was halfway through a narrow passage in the twisted hull when the first sign of life appeared, faint, barely perceptible. A movement. John's pulse quickened, his breath catching. Without thinking, his hand immediately went to the sidearm at his waist, though his instincts told him it wasn't needed. This wasn't some hostile enemy. His mind had already begun calculating the crash, the damage, the likelihood of survivors. He followed the movement carefully, stepping over broken panels and scorched debris. The heat from the fire had mostly dissipated, but the air was still heavy with the stench of burnt fuel. When he reached the final chamber, he saw her. Lying on the cold floor, barely conscious, was an alien woman, tall, with violet-hued skin that shimmered in the dim light. Her long, dark hair was matted with blood, and her chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. She was beautiful in an otherworldly sense, a stark contrast to the cold, barren landscape outside. Her body, despite the evident damage, radiated a kind of quiet strength, even in unconsciousness. John moved quickly, his medic training kicking in. He knelt beside her, hands steady as he assessed her injuries. A deep gash ran along her side, and blood seeped from a wound in her abdomen. There was no sign of immediate death. Her pulse was weak but present. No time for hesitation. With precise movements, he pulled out his medical pack, his mind fully engaged in the task at hand. He had performed surgery in worse conditions, on battlefields, in makeshift hospitals, on distant colonies, but there was something about this situation that felt different. He couldn't put his finger on it. The woman's eyelids fluttered open, revealing iridescent eyes that seemed to gleam with an intelligence that caught him off guard. She blinked at him, her pupils dilating, her breath catching in her throat as she tried to speak. But no words came out. Just a soft, breathless rasp. John's hand instinctively reached for her shoulder, his voice low and calm. Hey. You're safe now. I'm here to help. Her gaze locked onto him, and in that instant, something passed between them, something unspoken but undeniable. It was as though, in the briefest moment, their souls recognized one another, a fleeting connection that felt inexplicably deep. His heart, usually shielded by the years of service and loss, fluttered uncomfortably. She tried again to speak, but only a series of disjointed sounds emerged. A vibration in his mind, not quite words, but emotions, desperation, fear, and a flicker of trust. John's fingers hovered near the wound, but she flinched, her eyes wide with pain and something else, something more primal. I can help you, John repeated, his voice a whisper in the thick air of the wreckage. A beat of silence passed, then, slowly, she nodded, her head barely lifting off the ground. He could feel the weight of her gaze on him, something ancient, something raw. With a steady hand, John applied the healing biofoam to her wound. The medical technology he carried was far from advanced by the standards of the alien world she must have hailed from, but it was effective. As the foam began to work, A soft hum of energy filled the air around them. The atmosphere, dense with a kind of quiet intensity, seemed to thrum with a strange rhythm, a harmony. John's focus never wavered, but in the back of his mind, a question nagged at him: why had she been here? What had she been running from? He couldn't shake the feeling that this was no ordinary rescue. The connection he'd felt, brief as it was, lingered like an electric charge in the air. The woman's breathing steadied, her features softening as the immediate danger passed. Still, her eyes stayed locked on John, unblinking. She had no words, but her gratitude was palpable. In a world that often relied on cold calculation and military precision, this silent exchange, this raw, unspoken understanding, was unsettling. He helped her sit up slowly, watching her with a mix of wariness and curiosity. Something about her, something about this moment, made him question everything he thought he knew. Then, from the far distance, a sound reached them, a low hum, reverberating through the air, as though the ground itself was calling out to them. John's breath caught. The warlord's fleet had arrived. The silence shattered as the distant rumble of incoming ships grew louder. And in that moment, John realized this was no ordinary rescue. And the woman he'd just saved? She was far more than she appeared. The sunless sky above the wreckage flickered with the glimmer of distant stars, their cold light cast over a barren moonscape that felt more alien with each passing second. Dr. Jonathan Hale's heart still raced, a deep undercurrent of tension that hadn't subsided since the moment he first laid eyes on the alien woman, Ilyana. Now, as the faint but unmistakable hum of the incoming warlord's fleet grew louder, it was as though the universe itself held its breath. A distant rumble echoed through the wreckage, the first of many to come. Ilyana sat beside him, her violet skin paler now, but her posture had straightened with surprising resolve. Her wound was healing, the biofoam he'd administered working more effectively than he'd expected, but it was clear she wasn't out of danger yet. Every now and then, her gaze flickered toward him, a silent, almost desperate gratitude in her eyes, though she hadn't spoken a word since he saved her life. The air between them was thick, charged, not with tension, but with something deeper, something that felt almost primal. "You should be resting," John said, his voice gruff, trying to focus on the immediate threat. His mind was a tangled mess, questions about Ilyana, about why she was here, and most urgently, how the hell they were going to survive whatever was coming. Her eyes, those luminous, haunting eyes, focused on him with a sharpness that took him off guard. She tilted her head, her movements graceful despite the weakness in her body. Then, in a soft hum, words began to form, not spoken, but sent directly into his mind. "They are coming. They want me dead." The force of her telepathic communication left him breathless for a moment. He had known there was something special about her, beyond her alien beauty, beyond her near-miraculous healing, but this was unexpected. Telepathy wasn't common, not even in the farthest reaches of human colonies. John swallowed, his throat dry. "Who are they? Why do they want you dead?" Ilyana's gaze flickered to the horizon, where the first specks of enemy ships became visible against the star-speckled sky. Her body tensed, and for the first time, John saw fear. It wasn't a fear of physical harm, no, it was something deeper. A fear of losing something far more precious. "I am the last of my kind." Her voice quivered in his mind, a fragile thread of emotion connecting them in the silence. "I carry the only hope for my people. The warlord will stop at nothing to take it from me." John's heart thudded painfully in his chest. He had seen people break under pressure, collapse in the face of fear, but Ilyana was different. There was a strength in her, a quiet dignity that made the weight of her words hit harder than he had anticipated. Without thinking, he moved closer, his hand resting lightly on her uninjured shoulder. Her skin was cool, smooth, far different from his own, but somehow, it felt right. The sensation of touching her was electric, a sharp jolt of warmth that spread through his veins. He cursed under his breath, forcing his mind back on track. "We can't let them get you. Not after everything we've been through." His voice was steady, though he felt far from it. The fear wasn't for himself. He had trained for moments like this. It was for her. He didn't even know why, but the idea of losing her seemed impossible, a thought he couldn't entertain. Illyana's eyes met his, and the intensity in them left him breathless. I cannot run anymore. My people are dead. My home is ashes. The warlord will not stop until he has what he wants. John tightened his grip on her shoulder, his mind racing. 1,000 scenarios flashed through his head, escape plans, counterattacks, defensive strategies, but nothing seemed to make sense in this alien world. The warlord's fleet was closing in fast, and his training told him that fighting was a losing proposition. I will not let them destroy everything I have left. Illyana's telepathic voice was sharp, the resolve in it undeniable. I will fight. John stared at her, stunned by the power in her voice. He had always thought of himself as someone who had seen it all: wars, betrayals, sacrifice. But this alien woman, fragile in body yet unyielding in spirit, was a force he couldn't easily comprehend. Before he could respond, the first of the warlord's ships broke the horizon, a shadow blotting out the stars. It was massive, twice the size of a human battleship, bristling with weapons and a cold, calculated efficiency that spoke of ruthless intent. John's instincts flared, and for a fleeting moment he considered running. There was no way they could stand against such overwhelming force, no chance of survival in the face of such raw power. But then he looked at Illyana. The determination in her eyes, the fire that burned brighter than any star in the sky. She wasn't giving up, and in that moment either could he. All right, John said, his voice low but resolute. We fight. Illyana's telepathic presence surged with a ripple of emotion. Gratitude, yes, but there was something else too, something darker, something that spoke of a shared understanding. Together, then. We will make them pay. The hum of the enemy fleet grew louder, the air now vibrating with the approaching threat. The cold, silent moon beneath their feet seemed to tremble in anticipation. John felt his heart quicken. He wasn't sure what awaited them, but he knew this much: this fight would define everything. And as he prepared to face the warlord's forces, John realized something else. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for her. For Illyana. The enemy was closer now, and there was no turning back. The distant hum of the warlord's fleet reverberated through the jagged landscape, a constant reminder that time was running out. John could feel the air growing heavier with each passing second, thick with the tension of an impending battle that felt both impossible and inevitable. He stood beside Illyana, his eyes scanning the horizon where the fleet loomed, its enormous warships blotting out the stars like harbingers of doom. The cold moon beneath their feet felt uncomfortably silent, as if it were holding its breath too, waiting for the storm to break. John shifted his weight, trying to stay calm, but his mind was racing. Illyana was standing just a few feet away, her gaze fixed on the enemy ships. Her violet skin shimmered faintly in the dim light, a ghostly reflection of the stars above. Despite her injuries, she had recovered more than he had expected, her body healing itself at an alarming rate, as though the wound he had treated barely mattered. And yet he knew that it was her mind, her spirit, that made her the most dangerous. You said they wouldn't stop until they had you, John said, his voice steady but edged with urgency. What exactly are they after? Why you? Illyana's eyes flickered toward him, an unreadable expression crossing her features before she answered. The warlord wants the key to my people's legacy. The last vestiges of a power that could change the galaxy. I am the vessel. Her words were soft, but John could hear the weight behind them, the quiet acceptance of her role in this conflict. He'll stop at nothing to take it from me. To destroy it, to control it. John felt a chill run down his spine. The intensity in her words, the cold finality, told him just how dangerous this fight would be. And yet, in that moment, he couldn't pull away. Something inside him, something visceral, made him want to protect her, to keep her safe from the storm that was coming. How can you be sure? John pressed. You seem different. Stronger. I've never seen anything like this before. Illyana's gaze turned inward for a moment, as though she were weighing whether or not to reveal more. Her silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating, until she finally spoke again. It's not just me. It's what I carry with me. My people, we were the guardians of a force that could change the tide of war, the balance of power. The warlord seeks that power, but he doesn't understand it. He will destroy it if he gets it. I carry the last piece of it within me. John stepped closer, his heart pounding as he absorbed her words. The stakes were higher than he had imagined. If what she was saying was true, then this wasn't just a fight for survival. This was a fight for the future. The low rumble of the warlord's ships grew louder. Illyana's eyes sharpened. She could hear it too. The sound was oppressive, heavy with the knowledge of their imminent arrival. We don't have much time, John said, more to himself than to her. Do you have a plan? Illyana's lips curled into a wry smile, an expression that was both beautiful and dangerous. I have a plan, but I need you to trust me. John didn't hesitate. I'm with you. Always. Illyana nodded, her expression softening for the first time since they had met. Her telepathic presence surged with a wave of warmth, gratitude, and something else, a flicker of something more. He couldn't name it, but it was undeniable. Then stay close. And keep fighting. Before John could respond, the first of the enemy's ships broke the horizon, a massive, dark shape descending from the stars. The air trembled with the intensity of its engines, the ground beneath their feet vibrating. The warlord's fleet had arrived. The sound of distant gunfire echoed in the air, a prelude to the battle that would soon unfold. John felt the weight of the moment settle on him. He had fought in countless wars, seen entire civilizations fall, but this was different. This was personal. Get down! John shouted, pulling Illyana toward the cover of a nearby rock formation as the first volley of enemy fire blasted into the ground, sending chunks of debris flying in all directions. The force of the explosion sent a shockwave through the air, knocking both of them off their feet. John hit the ground hard, his vision swimming for a moment. He blinked, trying to clear his head, but Illyana was already on her feet, her movements fluid and precise, a stark contrast to the chaos around them. She didn't even seem to flinch as the next round of fire erupted nearby. John scrambled to his feet, his pulse racing. What the hell are you doing? Illyana's eyes glinted with determination, her lips curling into that dangerous smile once again. I told you. I will fight. And fight she did. With an elegance and precision that took John's breath away, Illyana moved through the chaos. She didn't just dodge the enemy fire, she anticipated it, weaving between the explosions like a predator in its prime. John watched, stunned, as she seemed to absorb the energy around her, her body moving in perfect synchrony with the danger that threatened them both. Then, without warning, she raised her hand, and John felt a pulse. A wave of raw, untamed power surged from her. The very air seemed to bend and twist, as though her energy was warping reality itself. A blast of telekinetic force erupted from her outstretched hand, obliterating an entire squadron of enemy troops with a single wave. John stumbled back, awestruck by the sheer magnitude of her power. She turned to him, her expression unreadable. This is the power the warlord wants. But it is not his to control. As the last remnants of the warlord's soldiers were scattered across the moon's surface, John felt something stir inside him, a mixture of awe and fear. Illyana had done more than just defend herself. She had obliterated the threat, but at what cost? He knew there was no turning back now. And neither did she. The battle was far from over, but now, John understood the true depth of what they were up against, and the price they would both have to pay. The moon's surface was a wasteland of burning craters, debris scattering the ground like forgotten fragments of a dying civilization. John crouched low behind the wreckage of an ancient structure, his pulse still hammering from the onslaught moments before. The dust hung thick in the air, carrying the scent of burnt metal and scorched earth. He wiped sweat from his brow, the taste of fear sharp in his mouth. The battle wasn't over, not by a long shot. Beside him, Illyana stood in stillness, her body unshaken by the devastation surrounding them. Her violet skin was streaked with ash, her eyes gleaming with something that wasn't entirely human. She had fought like a force of nature, her powers obliterating the enemy with a fierce elegance that left John both in awe and terror. There was no mistaking it now, she was the key to this war, the one the warlord had been chasing for so long. And John. He was the one who stood beside her. He looked at her now, seeing the strain in her eyes. Despite the power she wielded, she was not invulnerable. There was a sadness beneath her fierce exterior, a quiet resignation that seemed to echo in every movement she made. For the first time since they had met, John noticed the full weight of her burden. "You did it," John said, his voice hoarse. "You stopped them." He didn't know what else to say. They had won, at least for now, but at what cost? He saw the brief flicker of something dark in Illyana's gaze, something that spoke of sacrifices made, of pieces of herself she would never get back. "I don't know if we can keep doing this," Illyana spoke, her telepathic voice echoing in John's mind. "I am tired. Every battle drains me, piece by piece. There is no end to this. They will come again. And I don't know how much more I can give." John reached out instinctively, his hand brushing against hers. The connection was electric, a spark that flared through him, making his heart race. Her energy was powerful, but John could feel the strain beneath it, the fragile thread holding her together. She was more than just a warrior. She was a woman on the edge of breaking. "I won't let you fight alone," he said, the words raw, cutting through the thick tension between them. He meant it, more than anything. Illyana had carried the weight of her people, their legacy, their power. But now, John could see the cracks forming, the toll it was taking on her. He wasn't sure if he could protect her, not against a force this overwhelming, but he would try. He had to try. "You don't understand, John." Her voice was softer now, tinged with something that might have been regret. "The warlord, he will not stop. I have no way of defeating him. I'm just a weapon in a war I didn't start, in a fight that isn't mine." John shook his head, his fingers tightening around hers. "It's your fight now. But it's mine too. You're not in this alone." Illyana's eyes flickered with uncertainty, and for a fleeting moment, John saw the fear she had kept hidden. She was afraid. Not of the warlord, not of the soldiers, she was afraid of herself. Of what she had become. And that, more than anything, left John with a heavy sense of dread. How could he help her face what she was becoming when she couldn't even face it herself? The distant roar of enemy ships grew louder, tearing through the silence like a predator on the hunt. The moment had passed. The warlord was regrouping, and he was coming for them with everything he had. John could feel the weight of the oncoming storm, but it was Illyana who broke the silence first. "We don't have time to question what we're doing anymore, John. We have to end this, now." Her words rang out like a command, and for a moment, John felt the intensity of her presence. She wasn't just asking for his help. She was demanding it. "What are you planning?" John asked, but even as the words left his mouth, he had a sinking feeling he already knew the answer. Illyana's gaze shifted to the horizon, where the enemy fleet had begun to form up in a precise, deadly array. Her eyes narrowed. "I have one final move left. A weapon powerful enough to end this, but I will need to draw on all of my energy. It will be the last thing I can give." John's heart clenched. The fear he had seen in her earlier now turned into a cold, undeniable truth. Whatever she planned to do would cost her. It had to. He didn't know the extent of her abilities, but he could sense that this was a line she couldn't cross without consequences. "No," John said, his voice low but insistent. "I won't let you do it." Illyana's eyes locked onto his, her expression unreadable. "You don't have a choice, John." The air between them seemed to crackle with the weight of her words. John didn't know what to do. He could feel her resolve, but it was a kind of resolve that left no room for compromise. This was her decision to make, but it was one that would change everything. John reached for her, desperate. "There has to be another way. I'll fight. We'll fight together." Illyana shook her head slowly, her expression softening just slightly. "I've already lost everything, John. But I won't lose you." Not this way. Before John could protest, she stepped away, her body already gathering the energies she had been holding back. Her form began to glow with an otherworldly light, shimmering as if her very cells were transforming into pure energy. John felt the temperature drop, the air around them becoming heavy with the intensity of her power. He was helpless. The woman he had come to care for, this incredible, beautiful, dangerous woman, was about to make the ultimate sacrifice, and there was nothing he could do to stop her. "Get to safety, John," she said, her telepathic voice a mere whisper in his mind. "This is the only way." And then, with a final flash of light, Ilyana was gone, swallowed by the power she had summoned. John stood alone, the warlord's fleet closing in. He had one choice now: to fight. And to survive.